Hello travelers, Boardman21 here, and today I've got a 1 to 76 leveling guide for you for the new mastery we have out, the Warlock. And with this one we're going to be basing it around a bleed, and then later towards the end game going into a lot of necrotic damage for the Torment. But for leveling up, as many bleed stacks, some bleed overload is going to do a ton of damage and allow you just to basically lay down chthonic fissures the entire campaign and just allow them to annihilate all of the enemies for you. We'll have Spirit Plague for some extra damage over time, applying Plague, and then just boosting our global damage. But overall, it's going to be a very fast-paced, very quick leveling, and do a ton of damage. It does lack a little bit against single target, but that's going to be fine in the end game when we switch to full-on Torment. You'll be able to get plenty of damage out of that and have multiple fissures, allowing you to take single targets down quick as well, but we'll get that in another video. For this one, again, in the description below, I'm going to break it down at all the timestamps where we'll have all the points and passives I put in at one point to show you exactly how I'm going. With all that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, travelers, we are now level 4. Time to spec into our first skill. Again, in this first area, fire and physical resist are the two main things that you really want. You're going to run into a ton of that. For skills, we get to specialize our first skill, so we're going to go ahead and pick Wandering Spirits so that we kill most things as we run by. And we want to go with the Spirit Duration to make them last longer right off the bat, so 1 point into Lingering Souls. We got 2 passive points. We're going to throw both of them into Forbidden Knowledge for that intelligence, as well as Necrotic Res. And then for items, just get a one-handed or two-handed staff, or a one-handed wand or a two-handed staff. Get as much flat spell damage as possible. That'll really boost you as you go through. Cast speed is helpful as well. For everything else, just get resistance and health on all your other slots. And that'll be it for this. I'll see you guys at level 9 when we spec into Transport. Alright travelers, we are now level 9, time to specialize into our second skill, which will be temporarily until about level 13-14 when we can spec into Spirit Plague, but for now we're going to spec into Ripblood. But first, the character sheet. Again, Void Resist and Physical Resist are the two main types you're going to encounter here in Chapter 2, so work on those as fast as you can, get them as high as you possibly can. For skills, we got 3 more points for Wandering Spirits. We're going to go ahead and throw 2 points into Souls of Rage for that to damage and spirit move speed, 1 point into Poisoned Minds, and then the next point, the Spectral Puissance chance, we'll have them shooting out their Spectral Puissance, wow, I cannot say that for the life of me, which will give them the projectile, so they will actually hit from range as well as with their hit bodies, which will be really nice for damage. For our second skill, we're going to go ahead and go Rip Blood for now until we get Spirit Plague, and for Rip Blood, 1 point into Eviscerate for that blood splatter chance, just so we can get some AoE out of it, which will be nice for speed running through the campaign. For passives, we got 8 more points. We're going to cap out the Forbidden Knowledge for all that int and necrotic res, and then the last 2 points both into Stolen Vitality for the Vitality, which also gives us necrotic and poison res 1% each, which is nice. And then for the inventory, again, just get a two-handed staff. Spell damage, necrotic damage is going to be your biggest boost to damage at this point until we start doing bleeds, and then we're going to want to scale spell and physical damage, as that's what we'll be applying, as well as bleed on hit. For everything else, again, just get the resistances you need, again, in this area. Void resist and physical resist are the main things that you want. But that'll be it for this update. I'll see you guys at level 13 when we spec into Spirit Plague. Alright, Travelers, we are now level 13. We have enough passive points to unlock Spirit Plague, so we're going to swap that out for Rip Blood. So we're going to cover that again in this area. Void Resist, Physical Resist, the main things that you want to get. For skills, we'll do them right after we do passives. We got 7 more points here for passives. We needed 5 for Spirit Plague. We're going to go ahead and throw 6 of them into Stolen Vitality for all that Vitality for us to give us increased health and everything that we need. And then we're going to go ahead and put 1 point into Blood Aura for increased damage. And again, this will get us Blood Pact, will give us a ton more damage, which will affect the dots we do, the ailments we do, and of course just the straight spell damage. And then for skills, we got 1 more point for Wandering Spirits. We're going to go ahead and put that into the Spectral Putrescence so that they now shoot out those projectiles, poisoning on hit. For Rip Blood, we're going to despecialize this and now specialize into Spirit Plague. And the first thing we want to start working towards is getting all of the bleed stacks. So we're going to throw 2 points into Pestilence so that we get global damage over time every time that we use the skill. And then of course work up towards those bleeds next, as well as getting the Plague. The Spirit Plague, the Plague, and the Bleeds will give you a ton of dot right off the bat. And then again, for your weapon, get a staff with as much spell damage as possible. Increase spell damage, increase physical damage, increase necrotic damage are going to be the main stats you want right off the bat. For everything else, just get the resistance and health you need to survive and to keep going. And that'll be it for this update. I'll see you guys at level 20 when we spec into our 3rd skill. Alright, Travelers, we are level 20, which means we get to spec into our 3rd specialized skill. In this case, it will be Cathodic Fissure. But first, the character sheet. Again, we're in Chapter 2 right now. Chapter 2 and 3, Physical Resist and Void Resist are the main things you really want to go for. I've got the Void covered right now. I could use some Physical, but those 2 will keep you alive if you start getting them as high as possible. Work towards that 75% cap. For skills, we got 3 more points for Wandering Spirits. We're going to go 1 in Spirit Swarm, 1 point in Terrifying Presence, and then 1 point in False Courage, so that they get 12% more damage against enemies, and then their fear will last shorter, but this will also get enemies running away, which means they won't be attacking you, which will be really nice. And then that cooldown recovery so that we can use it more often. That reduces it from 13 seconds down to just under 12. For Spirit Plague, we got 4 points here. We're going to cap out the Hemorrhage so that we get 3 stacks of bleed every time that we cast it, and then 1 point in Laceration, that's so we get chance to bleed to enemies that are afflicted by Spirit Plague. So if we're casting Spirit Plague and we have a Cathodic Fissure down and it has spirits that are going, all those spirit hits should be applying bleed with this % chance. Of course, all your other bleed chance elsewhere will also apply. And then for Cathodic Fissure, we have 4 points, 1 point into Fragile Crust to reduce that mana cost as well as give us some mana cost back. 1 point in Eradication for extra damage to rares and bosses, doubled if cursed, and 2 points in Grasp of the Undying to give us some Fissure health leech so that we can sustain our life, as we don't have any sustain at the moment, but thanks to our passives we will in a second. Before we can put any points into the other ones, we have to have 20 points in the Acolyte base class, so 3 more points here, all 3 going into Blood Aura for that increased damage. And then the 5 points, we're going to spec into Lich first before we go Warlock, and put 5 points in Survival of the Quarrel, so that we're going to leech a lot of the spell damage we do, and that'll keep your health full, so that you'll have some sustain and be able to take some hits and keep moving. And then for the inventory, again, at this point for damage, you want a 2-handed staff. On it, you want as much spell damage, damage over time works, physical damage works, and increased necrotic damage. Those 4 types will really boost the damage of the types that we're doing at the moment. For everything else, just get all the resistance and health that you can in all of your empty slots. And that'll be it for this update. I'll see you guys at level 28 when we put in some more points into our passives and skills. Alright, Alright, Travelers, we are now level 28. It's time to put some more points into our passives and our skills, but first, the character sheet. As you can see here, we're in Chapter 4. Necrotic and Physical are the two main things we're running into. I need some Physical resist, but we have the Necrotic capped out. Again, Chapter 4, those will be the two main ones, so if you're having survivability issues, get those two up as much as possible. For skills, we got 2 more points for Wandering Spirits. We're going to throw them both into False Courage for that more damage, for all the damage that they do. Then for Spirit Plague, 4 more points. We're going to cap out the Laceration so that all of our spirits coming out of Chthonic Fissure should have that 150% chance to bleed on hit, which will be really nice as long as we have a Spirit Plague on those enemies. So make sure you're casting it on all the enemies, especially your single targets, rares, and bosses. And then for Chthonic Fissure, we got 5 more points. We want to get all that leech that we can, so 2 more points in Grasp of the Undying. Then we're going to go up here for the Spirit Frequency, so 1 point into Fell Fire, and the last 2 points into Stygian Current. Hold on, we got to put 2 points in Fell Fire and then 1 point into Stygian Current. And we want to cap out this to get as many spirits as possible, as they will apply all those ailments for us. And then for passives, we got 11 more points, 3 of which are going in the Lich to cap out the Survival of the Cruel so that we have more spell damage, leeches health. And then for the Warlock, the last 8 points, we want to get to those Bleed Overloads, so we're going with 5 points in Spiteful Decay, and then 3 points into Cauldron of Blood, and the next 2 points will go here so that we have all that bleed chance, and then we can officially start with that Bleed Overload, which will be really nice. And then for the inventory, at this point again, get a 2-handed staff with as much base spell damage as possible, get increased spell damage, increased necrotic damage, increased damage over time. Those will be the stats you're looking for. For everything else, get your resistance and all the health that you need. And that'll be it for this update. I'll see you guys at 35 when we spec into our 4th skill. Alright, Travelers, we are now level 35, which means it's time to spec into our 4th skill. But first, the character sheet. Again, in this area, Physical and Necrotic Resist are the 2 main things you want. Some fire also helps, especially against those scorpions, but work on getting all of them capped. For skills, we got 2 more points for Wandering Spirits. We're going to both of them into the False Courage for even more damage with them. Then we have Spirit Plague, 2 points here. We're going to throw 1 point into the Inflicting Plague, and then 1 more point into the Pestilence for that global damage over time. We can now get 15% at maximum 13 stacks. That's going to be 180%, 195%. Yeah, 195% increased damage over time for us, which will be really, really nice. And then for Chthonic Fissure, we got 2 more points here. We want to get into the Secondary Fissure, so 1 more point into Stygian Current, and 1 point into Of Gloom and Flames, so that we now have 2 fissures that go out, so you get a lot more spirits. This will make it a lot more expensive, so mana will be a bit of an issue here. You'll be casting it not as often as you were, which is fine. Spirit Plague, still your main skill, is going to be costing 0 mana, so still spam that a ton. And then because we'll have Bleed Overloads in our passives, we want to get Rip Blood. That's going to be being procced every second into getting some bleed as well. So we're going to go ahead and put 2 points into Hemomancer for it, and then the rest of them into Gushing Wound for all that to bleed chance. If you spec into the Eviscerate, that mana cost could eat you up alive, as I'm pretty sure that mana will get consumed with the Bleed Overload, so I wouldn't spec that till you have mana regen where you want it. For passives, we got 9 more points. We're going to throw 3 of them into the Cauldron of Blood for that bleed chance. We now have that chance for Bleed Overload as well, as long as within 15 meters, which is basically your whole screen, there's 25 or more stacks of bleed on enemies. Once that happens, you'll start casting Rip Blood every second with 4 points in Crimson Favors, and that's what we really want. And then the last 2 points we have, we're putting them into Spirit Leech for that health leech, and since we're cursing enemies with Spirit Plague, you get double the amount, which is really nice. That'll keep your health nice and full. And then for the gear, get a two-handed staff with as much base spell damage as possible. Cast speed, increased spell damage, damage over time, and physical damage are going to be the main ones you want to stack for all that bleed damage that we're doing. And then for everything else, just get the resistance and health that you need. And that'll be it for the sub-deal. See you guys at 43 when we spec some more points into our skills and passives. Alright, travelers, we're now level 42 with our Warlock. It's time to put some more points into our passives and skills. Again, we're in 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐵𝐷𝐼𝐻 chapter 7 at this point. Cold and physical are the two main resists you really want to get up, so if you're dying a lot, make sure to get your cold and physical up. For skills, we got 2 more points for Wandering Spirits. We're going to throw them both into Spirit Swarm to reduce that cooldown. So now we're down to a 10-second cooldown, so we can spam it 1.8 seconds faster than we could a second ago. For Spirit Plague, we got 2 more points. We're going to start working towards the Plague of the Eyes. So 1 point in Hindering Affliction, so we now apply Slow, as well as 1 point Enfeeblement, so we apply Frailty on our cast of it as well. And then the next point will go in the Plague of the Eyes. For Chthonic Fissure, we got 3 more points. We want to max out the Fragile Crust for that reduced mana cost, as well as get it refunded. Right now it costs 69 mana. Now it's only going to cost us 54, which is much cheaper, and we'll get to refund 18% of that instead of only 6. So you should be able to cast it more often now, which will help keep you alive. And then that last point going into the current for more spirit frequency. Again, your spirits are going to be applying all of that bleed chance that you get through Spirit Plague, as long as you have Spirit Plague on the enemy. So make sure you're casting both Chthonic Fissure and Spirit Plague all the time. And then for Rip Blood, we're going to cap out the Splatter for that blood splatter chance, and cap out the Gushing Wound for that bleed chance. Again, every time Bleed Overload is on, you'll be casting this every second automatically. And then for passives, we got 9 more points. We're going to cap out the Spirit Leech so that we're getting as much Leech as possible. We're cursing enemies with Spirit Plague. And of course, we're going to get into Wither, which will be another curse for us, allowing us to do that on hit with all of the things that we're proccing. 2 more points in Crimson Flavor for that bleed chance with Rip Blood. And then 2 points in Cauldron of Blood for that bleed chance for everything. The very last point here going into Wither, so we have a 20% chance on all hits that we do to apply Wither, which will just do another dot for us. And then for the inventory, again, go for a 2-handed staff with as much flat spell damage as possible, cast speed, physical damage, and then of course a dot damage, as well as increased spell damage are the 4 main stats you want to look for. And then for suffixes, you can get any of the elements of your choice. For everything else, get all of your resist and as much health as possible. And that'll be it for this update. I'll see you guys at level 50 when we spec into our 5th skill. Alright, travelers, we are level 50 now, which means it's time to specialize our 5th skill. But first, the character sheet. Again, we are in the monos. We are on the first timeline. Fall the Outcast, and Necrotic and Physical are the 2 main sources of resist that you're going to need for this timeline, although capping all of them will be your best interest. For skills, we got 1 more point for Wandering Spirits. We're going to throw it into Lingering Souls to keep them up longer. For Spirit Plague, we got 1 more point. We're going to throw it into Plague of the Eyes to increase the damage, the spell, necrotic damage based on the intelligence for us. So we'll be scaling lots of intelligence anyways. For 𝐻𝐿 Fissure, we have another point. We're going to start having our Chaos Bolts proc since we're going to spec into them as our 5th skill. So 1 point here, so that you have a 20% chance for those spirits to now be a Chaos Bolt. Then for Rip Blood, 3 more points, all 3 into Quenching for those Blood Orbs for some health back every time that they go off. And then for Chaos Bolts, they do cost mana, and we already have a mana intensive build, so we're going to want mana back on their hits. So we're going to go with 1 point in Abrupt Chaos, 1 point into Doom's Vindication for all that hit damage, and then 2 points in Devour the Damned. Gives us that mana gain against cursed enemies whenever they do a hit, which is nice. And then the last 3 points, we're going to spend 2 of them into Condemned and Chaos for the Damned on hit chance. Again, this is going to be necrotic damage for us, which is what we're scaling, and 1 point in Seed of Chaos, so there's a chance to recast whenever they do get a hit against a cursed enemy, which will be nice for us. We'll be doing lots of curses with Spirit Plague, with Withering, and then with the eventually we'll get into Witchfire as well. And then for passives, we got 8 more points. We're going to throw 5 of them into Chains of Ruin. This will allow us to now have the Damned Overload whenever we have more than 20 stacks of Damned on enemies within 15 meters. And Spirit Plague and 𝐻𝐿 Fissure both have the Necrotic tag, which can proc this, which will be nice. And then the last 3 points all into Wither for that Wither chance on hit, which will take less damage from enemies that have that, which is nice, as well as it applies some damage for us. And then for the inventory, again, 2-handed staff, your best in choice. At this point, you can wear the moon staff starting at 50. It gives you a ton of flat spell damage as well as that -3 spell mana cost. And then you could also, in the prefix, get mana regen and mana, which will solve pretty much all of your issues if you get a high roll of that. For the other one, I went with cast speed on this one just because that's what it had on it. But again, spell damage, getting necrotic damage over time are going to be your best in slot for the most damage. And that'll be it for this update. I'll see you guys at level 60 when we put some more points into our skills and passives. Alright, Travelers, we are now level 60. Time to put some more points into our skills and passives. We are on the second timeline, which is going to be a lot of physical and void, so make sure you cap out that void before taking on the boss on the Black Sun timeline. For skills, we got 2 more points for Wandering Spirits. We're going to throw them both into Reap of the Damned so they deal a bit more damage, because we are damning all of the enemies and cursing them, so this is a lot more damage that they will do. And then for Spirit Plague, we got 2 more points. We're going to go ahead and build into more of that dot damage, so we're going to go with the Spirit Plague dealing more damage here, 2 points into Run to the Core. Then for 𝐻𝐿 Fissure, we have 1 more point. We threw 1 point into the Sunder's Domain so that we could have more maximum fissures, so we now can have 4. That's how much we can have up, and since we're double casting him, you basically just have to cast it twice and you'll be at the max there. This does reduce the amount of Spirit's frequency, but because we have so many fissures up, you're still doing plenty of damage with it. And then the other point, we're going to go ahead and put it into the Gorgery here so that we have that Torment damage. We're going to start working down towards Twisted Waves as well. We'll need some extra points, possibly even some plus skill points on the Helm. And so for that, we'll have to take 1 point out of Grasp of the Undying and 1 point out of the Current. For now, I'm going to leave them until we get to 76 and then we'll respec. But you do want to get down here and stack Necrotic Res, and you'll get a lot more damage out of this. But we'll work on that at 76 plus. And then for Rip Blood, 2 more points, just going to put them both in Quenching. Eventually, we're going to get rid of Rip Blood altogether, but for now, we're still procking it with Blood Overload. And then for Chaos Bolts, we got 10 points. We really want all that hit damage to Damned, Ignited, Bleeding since we're doing all of that. So 3 points in here. Then we're going to go ahead and throw 1 more point into Abrupt Chaos that unlocks the Pandemonium. So 3 points into this. That leaves us with 3 points, and we're going to go for the 1 big bolt. This will increase the mana cost. If you're having mana issues, don't put them here. Go ahead and put them into either Ignite, more Damn Chance, or into more damage with Vindication. But for us, we're going to go with 1 into Aura, 1 point into Mana Anarchy, and then 1 point in Chains of the Betrayer for that 1 big bolt, which will do a lot more hit damage for us. And for passives, we got 10 more points. We're going to cap out the Chains of Ruin for all that Damned Chance. We're then going to put 3 points into the Ashen one, and this will give us increased necrotic damage. Eventually we'll build into that Witchfire on Damned Overload, since we'll have Damned Overload going off all the time. But the rest of our points, all 4 of them, are going into Vessel of Chaos for all that increased damage over time. 1 more point here, we'll get the more damage per overload, which with Damned Overload will be nice. It's another more modifier for us. And then again, for the inventory, just go with as much flat spell damage as possible. Starting at level 50, you get the Moon Staff, which is really nice. And then, of course, for that prefix, the flat mana and mana regen will solve all of your mana issues. Try and get as high a roll of that as you can. On everything else, just get the resistance and health that you need. Increase physical damage, cast speed, damage over time, and spell damage are going to be the main things you're looking for. And then we are stacking a lot of necrotic res once we get that more damage based on our uncapped necrotic res, just so that you can do a ton more damage with Torment, which is what at 76 we'll really be going for. But that'll be it for this update. At 76, we'll put in the rest of our skill points and some more passives. Alright, Travelers, we are now at level 76. Time for the final points into our skills, some more points into passives, and the character sheet. So at this point, you want to cap out all those resists. I'm still working on some physical, poison, and void. And then after that, make sure you get that critical strike avoidance up. I didn't get the blessing yet, which would cap us out. But that and endurance up to 60% is the next thing defensive-wise to go for. For skills, I got 3 more points for Wandering Spirits. We're going to throw all 3 of them into Reap of the Damned for that damage against cursed enemies and damned enemies. And then we have a Spirit Plague with 2 more points here. We're going to go ahead and continue to do the more damage for Spirit Plague itself, since it is necrotic damage over time, which is what we're scaling, what Torment will be scaling. For Chthonic Fissure, we got 3 more points. We're going to go ahead and start working down here to getting the more damage per necrotic res. So 1 point into Spirit Gale, then 2 points into Damned Waters. Our next points are going to go here, and those points are we're going to take 1 out of the Gasp of the Undying and 1 out of the Current. So those 2 points will need to come out, and as you level up, put them both into the Twisted Waves so that you can get that extra damage. Again, with a tier 5 increase to Chthonic Fissure, you'll have the 3rd point for Twisted Wave and another point for the Gorger here. And then for Rip Blood, we unspec'd it, went into Transplant, and this is where you're going to want all 20 points for Transplant here. We want the Bone Armor, we want the mana back for Transplant, you want the kill threshold, which is really nice, and then that cooldown will help you transplant as much as possible, getting that 30 mana back so you can keep the Chthonic Fissures going over and over again. Then for Chaos Bolts, we got 2 more points for it. We're going to go ahead and throw both of them into the Vindication, or actually 1 point into Vindication and then 1 point into the Exalt Mystery. Since we are doing Damned, Ignite, and Bleeding, that'll be a whole bunch more hit damage for you. For passives, we got 16 more points. We're going to throw 1 more in Vessel of Chaos for that 5-point bonus for more damage per overload, which we have the Damned Overload going for us. And then with the last 15 points, we're going to throw all 5 in the top ones. 5 points in Aspect of the Depth will give you a ton more increased health, as well as more damage per negative ailment on us. As we kill enemies, we will also get Damned on ourselves, which will be automatically cleansed if we get to low life with our 5 points in Accursed Seer. This cleanses all those curses when leeching low health. And then 5 points in Deathbringer gives us more spell damage. Actually, we have to go 2 points in Darkness to actually unlock it. But then our next points will go into Deathbringer for all that spell damage for curses, which will affect Chthonic Fissure and everything that it does, which will be really, really nice. And then for the inventory, again, 2-handed weapon with as much spell damage as possible. I don't know why it's hovering over a bow, but with as much spell damage as possible, damage over time, and then that flat mana and increased mana regen hybrid affix is really nice for all the mana issues that you encounter with Chthonic Fissure. But for everything else, just get as much health as possible, all your resistance, and then as you build into that torment damage, get as much necrotic resistance as you can on everything, including your idols. And that'll be it for this leveling guide. I'll see you guys next time.